BYU and Utah in the 2025 college football playoff. ESPN is predicting that. Like I'm serious. Wow. This is Locked On Big 12.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Thursday, everybody. Welcome into Locked On Big 12. I'm Drake Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. Thank you for making this show your first listen every single day. We will start. BYU and Utah are both being picked to make the college football playoff, and not by some rinky-dink reporter. Nope, by ESPN. What? How? We will also get to the Big 12 hammered the SEC in the transfer portal window, destroyed their conference, and further bolstered this league, and I think closed the gap between ourselves and the Southeastern Conference. And preseason top 10. Iowa State just outside of it. Arizona State, Kansas State just outside of it. ESPN has BYU as the number 9 team in the country above South Carolina and Ole Miss. Oh, okay. Respect for us. If you hit subscribe, I get to keep my job. Let's jump into BYU and Utah both being in the playoff per ESPN. Take it away.
The ESPN Love Fest, I don't think this surprises anyone, but the ESPN Love Fest with the SEC has already begun, and we're not even to February when we look at next year's college football playoff.
Well, why not, TJ? I mean, this is their vested interest. I mentioned it on your show, on my show. If you buy stock in something, you buy Microsoft stock, you want Microsoft to succeed. Well, ESPN's #1 stock is the SEC. That's what they've doled all their money toward, and now they want the SEC to win. So Bill Connolly releases ESPN's predictions for the college football playoff next year. LSU is in, despite having a really dilapidated year this year, losing to USC. They also have South Carolina, Georgia, and Texas, once again going back to the college football playoff. So we see a lot of repeat offenders here and repeat big brands and SEC brands. My question is, when will we learn? When will we learn that the SEC is not all it's cracked up to be? The SEC wasn't in the national championship this year. The referees had to legitimately bail out Texas because they dropped a football in the game-winning touchdown this season to get them into that Final Four of the college football playoff. And what's more is, what are these other brands doing here? Clemson in the conversation with being in the college football playoff for ESPN. I mean, Boise State is back. What are the odds the same Group of 5 school goes in back-to-back years? Now, I do agree with the Big 12 schools that they've placed into their top 12. BYU as the winner of the Big 12 championship, and they actually have 2 schools in here. There have been multiple colleagues of mine who've said the Big 12 will never get 2 and never get 3 in, but both BYU and Iowa State included in Bill Connolly's list. I like that part. What I don't like is tossing a bone to South Carolina just because they were good last year and had a quarterback who was ranked, I think it was On 3 or one of those outlets that ranked him like the number 19 best quarterback in the country. And I'm like, okay, great. I mean, he's good, no doubt, but can they lead South Carolina to the college football playoff to play Georgia in round 1 and the winner plays Texas? Like, here's what's the stupidest part about this is the committee knows, and they're directly tied to ESPN, they would never put South Carolina versus Georgia in the first round and the winner plays Texas. They wouldn't bowling ball through the pins of the SEC like that in round 1 and round 2. TJ, what's worse, though, is I saw an On 3 graphic today that labeled, this is spectacular, it labeled per ESPN their auxiliary prediction for who will go to the college football playoff and represent America next year. And this is ESPN's second prediction where they actually picked it all out. They have Louisville, they have Penn State, they've got Utah representing the Big 12 next year, and Utah being the only Big 12 team included. Michigan playing Ohio State round 1. LSU is in there, and UNC under Bill Belichick in the college football playoff. TJ, the question from me goes out to you because I think this is the stupider of the 2 predictions from ESPN. How? Like they have Michigan, Ohio State playing round 1. That just shows me this is clickbait to the highest degree because not only do they have that, they have Bill Belichick right in the fat middle of it.
Do they watch college football?
No.
You and I watch. I mean,
too many games. I watch too many games.
Yeah, my wife gets mad at me because I'll come to bed at like 2 a.m. after watching Hawaii on a Saturday night. And she'll be like, "Why are you? We got church in the morning." I'll be like, "Yeah, sorry, Hawaii was playing and I couldn't miss it." But do they watch? That would be my question. Do they watch college football? Like I like the Bill Belichick hire. Let me just tell you, like I'm not here to crap on that. I like the move, and I'm not even guaranteeing it works out, but I think it's a good move. It's hey, let's try and replicate what maybe they did at Colorado a little bit and bring in a little bit of a personality and an amazing coach. Like, I like it. But did they watch North Carolina? Like, do they really think that all of that is fixed? Like, that team is somehow going to surpass Miami and Clemson and even SMU? Are we confident that even after a 2-10 season, they're better than my Seminoles this year? Like, that's just ludicrous to me that they would use UNC there. UNC, do you remember they gave up 70 points to James Madison last year?
Yeah, they did. James Madison sucked.
I don't expect that again. But to put UNC, Utah, I mean, what is more? Yeah, back to you. Let's play ping pong here for a minute. What is more absurd, Utah or UNC?
And they don't even have a quarterback, man. I don't hate Utah, but like, you look up and down the roster, they don't have a single quarterback. All they have is Isaac. Well, they just brought in the kid from New Mexico. Fine, right? Like, okay, New Mexico State. Okay. What? No, that's not going to mean we're going to the college football playoff. Or you play Isaac Wilson, who I watched live twice last year, and he was bad, TJ, really, really bad. Utah lost a lot of great talent like Dorian Singer, and now we think they're going to go to the playoff. If Utah goes 7-5, it's much better than their 5-7 record last year in the Big 12. It's hyper competitive, but now they're the lone representative for this conference. How? Why? Why? BYU exists, and Iowa State exists, and Kansas State, and Arizona State has Sam Leavitt and Jordan Tyson back. They are going to be a force offensively. They are going to be studly defensively based on what they've done in the transfer portal. This is clickbait to the highest degree. And look, I'm roll back the windows a little bit here and give you some inside information. I'm a small-time YouTuber, right? 28,000 subscribers compared to big ESPN with their multi-millions. From time to time, I make a title that's a little clicky. Why? I want to bring you in and I want you to fall in love with the content, right? I want to have something that differentiates myself from a headline that you might see from On3 that just says, Michigan will beat Ohio State next year. No, I want to fluff it up a little bit. When you're the four letters, when you have the reputation of ESPN, you don't have to tell me that Michigan, Ohio State would play in the first round of the playoff. The committee would never do that to those two schools. You don't have to tell me that it's going to be an Alabama-Georgia semifinal after what we saw out of Alabama, or that North Carolina is going to be there, or that not only TJ will Utah make it, they'll beat Texas when those two teams square off in a neutral site game. This is just clickbait so that you and I can talk about it.
Taking it back full circle to the beginning, the love fest with the SEC. Like, I don't even really have a big problem with it because, again, if I owned the SEC, sure, I would do the same thing, sure, to be very fair. Yeah. But is it necessary on January 28th? Is it necessary right now to start to? And maybe the answer to that is yes. You need to start formulating that opinion so that all year we're talking about and we're expecting those teams to be in. So when they have a bad loss to Kentucky, when they lose on the road in the Swamp, when they have a loss to Arkansas or whomever, we forgive that, right? Well, they're already a playoff team. They just stubbed their toe. Yeah. But what it ends up hurting is when Clemson has a bad loss, when Miami has a bad loss, when Arizona State has a bad loss, when BYU has a bad loss, we hold them to a much higher standard and we say, see, I told you they weren't a playoff team. I told you they were just about a 12 seed. I told you they were right on the fringe, but clearly they proved they didn't belong. And so I'm going to answer my own question and say, yes, it is necessary for ESPN to do this. It is necessary for them to start to formulate your opinions so that all year you operate under the guise that this team was better than this other team because of what we told you back in January.
Well, and here's the sad part is that RPI, strength of schedule, all that jazz, they still won't give Utah any respect. You're going to tell me that you're going to put Utah on this graphic and have them as a college football playoff team, and then when Utah goes 7-5, you're going to give no one any credit for beating them. We're going to give you credit for beating USC. We're going to give you credit for beating LSU. We're not going to give you credit for beating Utah, and that's a double standard that will never change. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is exactly where I go when I'm looking for Super Bowl tickets. I am off that day. The very rare occasion that I'm off on a Super Bowl Sunday and attending NFL playoff games or even the Super Bowl is an experience like no other. The energy, the excitement, my first NFL game, the Cowboys versus the Eagles on a Monday night. I'll never forget it. This year, Game Time makes it easier to create those unforgettable moments with their new features. Game Time Picks filters out fluff, shows you the best deals on great seats. You can focus on what matters, being there. You can find curated deals and make it easier to find the best price on great seats, super deals, seat view before you buy, on-time ticket delivery, lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, and I promise you that is guaranteed.
Was the Big 12 more successful than the SEC in this portal window?
No doubt, TJ. Where the Big 12 is always going to win against the SEC is the Big 12 will get a lot of the better young players out of that conference. And from there, you can flip them into day one starters. Hey, you were a sophomore or didn't get your flowers in your 2 years in an SEC school, and you were promised playing time as a junior, but you don't really believe it. Where do you go? The Big 12. And SEC fans are like, oh, you're sloppy seconds. No. Legitimate good athletes are moving from the SEC and coming to the Big 12. And on the other hand, a great athlete out of Northern Illinois, like a Skylar Gill Howard who went to Texas Tech, who could look at the SEC, says, wait, I could walk into the Big 12 day one and immediately make an impact for a university. So I'm just going to do that. And so many of these athletes are kind of falling in the middle of the transfer portal because they don't feel as though they can make that big jump up. And again, at the same time, they feel as though, hey, I can make a little slight jump down to the Big 12 and immediately contribute wherever I go. Texas Tech had, by and large, the number one recruiting class of anyone out of the transfer portal this season. They're certainly not an SEC program. And one of the even better parts about where the Big 12 sits right now is what I call positive attrition. In the Big 12, you'll see schools like a Texas Tech, schools like a Kansas State and Iowa State. They don't lose a ton of pieces, BYU included, out of the transfer portal. Instead, they lose pieces that they didn't really need. You see them exit a school like BYU or Texas Tech, and they're not really well regarded or very highly regarded, and they're not even a net loss. They're kind of a gain once you lose those guys. They didn't contribute too well for you. They weren't going to contribute. They didn't pan out. You couldn't develop them. So instead of having them on your roster, why not take that second-year SEC guy from Auburn who still has a chip on his shoulder, who still has a lot to prove, and who can help even out college football? You think like, oh, well, is college football actually evening itself out? Vanderbilt beat Alabama. Northern Illinois beat Notre Dame this season, right? I can't even remember which school it was. That's how odd that it seemed that so many of these smaller teams were able to compete with a national championship contender, the team that got all the way to the last game and was within a score inside of 5 minutes to go. There are schools like Texas Tech, Colorado out of the Big 12 who dominated the transfer portal this year. And you're looking around the SEC going, yeah, you brought like 14 guys in and you have a pretty good transfer portal ranking, but also you lost 14 really good guys. So you're at just a net neutral at best, whereas a Texas Tech, we know they got better. A Colorado, we know that they got better. A Cincinnati, they got better, though marginally. A UCF, a Houston, a Kansas, a Utah. These teams, Baylor, Arizona, attacked 25 commits for Arizona out of the transfer portal. Baylor landing a former 5-star quarterback in Walker White. Oklahoma State, West Virginia. They lose the guys they need to lose. They gain new guys that they need to compete in the future of the Big 12. Whereas in the SEC, they lose the guys that could have been major contributors, and they gain guys who are major question marks. And if, again, I'm on a rant. I'm on a rant, TJ. If you're an SEC fan who wants to say that you're the best conference in college football, two things cannot be true at the same time. We're the best conference in college football. We're head over heels better than everybody else. Lane Kiffin says it's different, but also, yeah, we could pull this transfer out of Western Kentucky, and he's going to be able to compete day one. Oh yeah, the best nose tackle in Tulsa. Yeah, we're going to pull him day one, and he's going to be able to compete. He's going to make our team a competitor. Wait a second. Thought you told me you were head over heels better than everybody else, but now a kid from Tulsa gets to compete for you? I don't think so. And again, that's why so many elite or very good transfer portal players are falling in the median right now. And where the median sits is the Big 12. And another really glaring example of this is quarterbacks. The depth of the quarterback play in the Big 12 this last year, from Avery Johnson to Rocco Beck to Shadur Sanders, who was in New York, could have been in New York as a Heisman Trophy contender. And you look at the SEC and you go, oh, shoot. Not only were the quarterbacks just kind of average this year, they're going to be even more average next year in that conference. A guy who was considered by so many preseason to be a Heisman contender in Carson Beck is going to the ACC, and Quinn Ewers got booed off the stage at Texas, and he was supposed to be the crown jewel of that conference. TJ, when we talk about winning the transfer portal, the Big 12 clears the SEC far and away.
Yeah, Texas Tech, I mean, you have to kind of start and end there. Texas Tech, what they've done in the portal, pulling so many guys that not just the SEC was like Florida State.
I'm sorry, TJ. Again, soapbox, man. I couldn't be more passionate about this. Texas Tech had such a good transfer portal class. Micah Hudson, their 5-star wide receiver, best player, transferred out and then was like, shoot, man. They're getting good again, and then transferring back in. Like he's like, yeah, fine, I guess I'll go. Like that's how good it is that a blue chip receiver who could have gone anywhere in the country wants to come back now because Texas Tech's so good.
You mentioned them. They're number one in On3's rankings. Not only are we talking about who won the portal, well, Texas Tech is up there. And I know LSU and Ole Miss, like Portal King University, they took about 1 billion guys. So on different sites, they're higher. But rating the actual quality of players, Texas Tech way up there. You mentioned Baylor, Kansas, Houston, all super high when you look at the quality of player that was brought in. And then you mentioned, Colorado even, right? Took less guys this cycle because they've built more of a foundation, but they have a defensive tackle that came from Alabama. They're not playing around with this. And so, I think top to bottom, when you really look at what the Big 12 did, again, Texas Tech maybe being the standard for the sport this year, when you look at quality, it's pretty remarkable what the Big 12 has been able to accomplish. And it all kind of goes to what Brett Yormark pushes, right? Like the narrative that like, hey, open for business. We're ready to win now. We're ready to do things unexpected that maybe you thought the SEC, the Big 10 were going to do. It really just kind of falls in line with the whole Big 12 mantra, in my opinion.
So here's what's awesome about this. I think Baylor's a great example. And as a Baylor guy myself, I don't mind bringing it up. They lost guys in the transfer portal to Colorado State, Miami of Ohio. They lost guys at Jackson State, UTSA, Prairie View A&M, and Houston. Those aren't major universities. Like Baylor's losing talent, sure, but what we can prove is that they weren't good enough to play at a Baylor. So instead of having those guys on Baylor's roster, they go pick up recruits from Auburn, 2 guys from Oregon, from Texas A&M, from Louisville, from Alabama. That is how you know things are going really well for your university, is when, again, positive attrition. You probably aren't going to play here. Prairie View A&M's a better spot for you. Oh, but you kid out of Oregon who was a great recruit and just couldn't get on the field there, or there's an NIL deal. This is what happens so often, TJ. Oh my gosh, it's a soapbox. I've talked to offensive coordinators in college football who are handcuffed by their head coach. The reason they're handcuffed is because the team's top donor says, I want to unload the Loomis truck for that wide receiver. And then that wide receiver doesn't pan out, isn't very good. The offensive coordinator goes to the head coach and says, hey, we should be playing somebody else over this kid. He can't deliver. He's not making his money. The guy's like, well, we're giving him 1.2 in NIL, and it's our biggest donor, and that's the kid, that's his horse we picked. We're kind of stuck here. I've heard these real-life stories from college football coaches. That's not happening a lot. That's not happening a lot in the Big 12. It's happening in Oregon, and if I'm a kid in Oregon and I got to sit behind the $1.2 million guy who's not producing, and the reason I got to sit there is because of NIL, I'm gone. Deuces. I'm still really good at football, but I'm going to go play in the Big 12.
We thought that the portal and NIL would make the rich get richer. And in some ways, it certainly has, right? Like, we're not going to pretend that it hasn't. But in other ways, and certainly the way that you're describing, the way that we talked about, it has evened out college football. And there's absolutely no doubt about it. You mentioned Vandy. You mentioned Northern Illinois. There are definite cases. I mean, shoot, look at Arizona State, right? Like there are definite cases of the Big 12, the ACC, these conferences that we kind of look at as lower or under. There's a definite case for college football being evened out thanks to the portal, thanks to NIL. Maybe not in the way that we think about it, right? The resources, Ohio State's always going to have more to spend. But in the situation you mentioned with maybe a guy that's backing up a big wide receiver at Oregon or wherever, it has certainly evened things out. Drake, where can people follow you? Where can they find more of your work, bud?
Well, TJ, I'll end it here. Cam Scadaboo, great example of that. Scadaboo could have gone to the SEC, sat on the Pine for 2 years, and then been a great breakout player in year 5, or go to Arizona State, build a career, lead his team to the college football playoff instead of playing at Mississippi State, going 3-9 and rushing for 2,000 yards that are meaningless. At LO Big 12 or at Drake C. Toll on Twitter, and wherever you find your podcast with Locked On Big 12.
BYU in ESPN's early projection for the top 12 and the college football playoff, meaning they would win the conference. Do they get it done this year?
Yeah, ESPN certainly thinks so, and I find this interesting. I was looking through their top 25, way too early top 25, and of course you see your Ohio States and Oregons, Georgia and Notre Dame all at the top. But before we escape the top 10, a familiar Big 12 face at number 9, the BYU Cougars, who went 11-2 last year, returning guys like Jake Retzlaff, LJ Martin, Chase Roberts, who will all be massive, massive pieces in not just that athletic department, but also in the Big 12. Harrison Taggart, the possible return of Isaiah Glasker or Jack Kelly, Tanner Wall. Those are huge, both offensively and defensively. Jay Hill, the defensive coordinator, still being there. I think the OC, A-Rod, still has a little bit that I want to see. The offensive line still has a couple of holes to plug, and I'm not exactly confident on that side of the ball in the BYU Cougars, but their special teams and their defense were elite in 2024. They bring enough guys back in 2025 that they're probably the favorite in the Big 12. Now, ESPN doesn't have Iowa State that far shy of where the Cougars are. They're at number 11. The Cyclones having Rocco Beck, Carson Hansen, Abu Sama, a double-headed running back tandem that is the best in possibly the country. We thought Sama would be the better of the two. We didn't even really know Carson Hansen that much until this season. He had a breakout year, and their defense, again, has like a Caleb Bacon returning, and that will make waves in the Big 12. Iowa State and BYU being maybe the favorite pick for the Big 12 championship. Arizona State, also in ESPN's way too early top 15, ranking at number 14. Kansas State falls in at number 16. TJ, the sky is falling. I don't know what's happening. ESPN, for some reason, is showing a whole lot of love to the Big 12, and they're putting Ole Miss at 25. They're dropping a couple of these SEC teams down. Now, if you look at Bill Connolly's way too early college football playoff projections, he has the BYU Cougars winning the Big 12 conference, going to the playoff, having a bye in the first round. However, the latest ESPN prediction for the college football playoff next year has just one Big 12 team in it. It's a school from the same state as BYU, but it's the Utah Utes. After a 5-7 season, they think they'll bounce back and go to the playoff as the champions of the conference, have the 4 seed, have a bye next year, will obviously beat BYU to get there, and stunning where ESPN steps on its own toes, contradicts itself. First in their top 25, they have BYU in the top 10. Next, they pick Utah to go to the college football playoff. So as exciting as this might be for BYU fans, take everything those 4 letters do with a big old grain of salt.
An ESPN contradiction. I never thought I'd live to see the day. When we look at BYU specifically, and then we'll talk more about ESPN in a moment, how much does the culture there matter to what they're doing? Because there were games that they honestly, in my opinion, as an outsider, I'm not trying to rile up the BYU fans, there were games they should have lost last year that they didn't, and they won. How much does that matter? You talked about some of the questions that we have about them. As many questions as I have, the biggest one that I don't worry about, maybe them along with Arizona State, is the culture that is built at BYU. And I almost think that is, we'll liken it to a Dan Campbell's Lions. We'll liken it to a culture that is very prevalent in Kansas City right now. How much does that factor into the way that they're able to win games they're not supposed to?
Yeah, BYU has a knack for winning. At least that's what they showed in 2024. They hope to bring that into 2025 as well. I want to cover your bases a bit there too, TJ. You say that BYU could have or should have lost a couple of those games, and you're right. If you look at the stat graphics that are, how bad did we get beat? Most of the time, it was the skin of their teeth that BYU was beating some of these teams on paper, whereas the score, like that Kansas State game, would be so blown out of proportion. BYU just found a way to win. Oklahoma State, a last-second game-winning drive. Utah, a last-second game-winning drive, converting a late 4th down with a penalty that was the right call, and you get the penalty, and the BYU goes and they win it. The Cougars just won football games, and they were one key win away against Kansas from going to the Big 12 championship and possibly representing this conference in the college football playoff a year prior to where ESPN predicts them to do so. But speaking on culture, This is what BYU wanted to instill with Kalani Sitake coming back, not being on the hot seat after a 5-7 start his first year in the Big 12. There was no chatter, no murmur of reworking his contract, making things different. Oklahoma State just took money from Mike Gundy directly and gave it to players now. That's a very interesting dynamic you created between head coach and athlete. For Kalani Sitake, it was nothing but full confidence from the administration at BYU. They want him as the head coach, and he brought that to his players. Now, there are upsides and downsides to that level of culture. Sitake runs his show with a lot of love and care, and there's the I'll rip your face off style of college football coach, and there's Kalani Sitake. And when he talks a lot about Utah, he talks about them being BYU's friend off the field, to love them, to show them grace, and I think all those align with the LDS faith that's so prominent at BYU. And while I agree those are all very admirable, the question then becomes, we lost a bit of fight for the Cougars against Kansas. You lost a bit of fight in that game against Arizona State in the first half. Where is that killer mentality? So the question will be asked for the next couple of years as BYU is now on the national scale in college football. Will they have the killer mentality in this sport, or will they embrace the love everybody mantra? And if they do one or the other, will it be effective? That's really the only major question I have culture-wise, and I don't think it's a bad one.
All right, so I'm not here for the love between the Holy War, right? Like, I understand it's called the Holy War, but I'm not here for the love. Back to ESPN for a moment. In one projection, having BYU in their college football playoff, and the other having Utah in their college football playoff. We talked about this in a previous video. The Holy War is 365 days. It is not one day, right? On a leap year, it's 366. We don't take a day off for the hate in the Holy War. BYU fans have to be somewhat excited about being in one projection, and then I don't even know if it would be disappointed, maybe more so like laughing with you about Utah being on the other side. Like, again, we talked about this, but just why is Utah on the other side of this? Like, BYU kind of makes a little sense. Utah to me doesn't make much at all.
I posed this a bit on my show, TJ. This is probably a win for BYU fans, the fact that Utah is preseason champions of the Big 12, and that win is being able to 2 years in a row point at the empty spot in the trophy case and saying, well, there it is. There's your preseason Big 12 championship. You won it outright, fair and square. It's all yours. Then you get to the end of the season, it doesn't pan out that way. I do think Utah could be a formidable opponent in the Big 12. I think Utah could make waves in the Big 12. I would be a bit far stretched to predict them in the college football playoff as Big 12 champions, obviously, but I don't mind the idea of them going 9-3 next season and being a thorn in everyone's side in the Big 12. But if you're a BYU fan, I think you relish in this. You say, how great. We get to have Utah fans' hopes up once again. They're going to believe once again, only for the likelihood of them crashing out. Now, maybe it doesn't happen, but I think BYU fans, from their perspective, they want Utah to fall flat on their face, while still hoping that they really do have a college football playoff shot. And those big four letters control most of the money and most of the stuff. And I'll put it this way. They control a lot of money and a lot of the pawns in college football. I wouldn't bet against whatever they predict, because they have a direct correlation to what actually happens.
Yeah, they are they're the puppeteer behind the committee. I raised my hands up, but they were all screaming. They're the puppeteer behind the college football playoff committee, no doubt. Drake, where can people follow you? Where can they find more of your work?
Yeah, at LO Big 12 or wherever you find your podcasts. At LO Big 12 or at Drake Cetol on Twitter, and wherever you find your podcast with Locked On Big 12.